IELTS General Writing Task 1. This is an introduction to the letter writing task if you're doing the general test. And you have 20 minutes to write 150 words or more for this letter. I'm going to suggest that you follow 7 steps when writing your letter. First, read the task and highlight key things. Second, choose the tone of your letter, formal, informal, or maybe you're not sure. I'll talk about that in a moment. Some examples of tone. A manager would be a formal letter. If you're writing to a friend, it would be informal. And if you're writing to a neighbour, you might not be sure which one to use. I'm going to suggest that when you're not sure like that, it's because you could either use formal or informal. If you know your neighbour very well, you could write an informal letter. If you're considering that it's a neighbour that you don't know very well, it could be a formal letter. So if you're not sure, it's probably because it doesn't really matter. You can choose. Step 3, choose an appropriate greeting and ending, depending on whether the letter is formal or informal. Number 4, decide on the overall purpose of the letter. You need to start your letter with a sentence that gives the reason for the letter, the purpose. Step 5, decide on the paragraph structure of your letter. You're going to separate into clear paragraphs. Some of the paragraphs will only have one sentence, but that's fine in a letter. Step 6, know the aim of each paragraph. What are you supposed to do? Are you supposed to thank someone, explain something, complain about something? You must fulfill the requirement of each of the points given on the task card. And finally, step 7, think of an idea for each point. You need something to write about, so you have to quickly think of a couple of ideas so that you can write something. Now let's look at these 7 steps in practice with a real example. Here's a task from IELTS General Writing Task 1, and we're going to go step by step through the recommended steps that I've just given you. First one was read and highlight the key things. So let's read this task. You recently organised a party for your company at a hotel. So a party, company, hotel. Write a letter to the hotel manager. In your letter, describe the party and how it went. Explain why you were pleased with the hotel service and suggest some improvements that the hotel could make. So we've got a party at a hotel. We're writing to the hotel manager. We have to describe, explain and suggest. Those are the key things. Now, step 2. Choose the tone. Well, we're writing to a hotel manager, so it's going to be formal. Step 3, a greeting and an ending for this hotel manager. We're going to start with Dear Sir or Madam, because we don't know the hotel manager, and we'll finish with Yours faithfully. If you begin with Dear Sir or Madam, you have to end with Yours faithfully. Next, point 4, purpose. What's the purpose of the letter? Well, I am writing with regard to the party that I recently organised for my company at your hotel. We'll just restate the main statement at the beginning of the task that I recently organised a party for my company, so we're going to state this straight away. I'm writing with regard to. That's a nice way to begin your letter. Point 5, paragraphs. Well, easy. We've got one short sentence, one short paragraph, one sentence for the purpose. Then we've got the 3 points that you see here, describe, explain, suggest. We'll have one paragraph for each one. And then we'll have a final sentence. So that's 5 separate paragraphs in total. And for every letter in writing task 1 in the general test, I'm going to recommend that you write these 5 separate paragraphs. Always have a purpose sentence, separate paragraph, then 3 paragraphs for the 3 bullet points on the task card, and then a final sentence. Step 6, the paragraph aims. Well, you can see the aims here. we have to describe the party, explain why we were pleased, and suggest improvements. We must answer those or fulfill those 3 aims or requirements. And finally, step 7, we need some ideas. So here are my ideas, 1 for each bullet point. Describe the party. I'm going to say it was my company's 20-year anniversary, and how it went. It was thoroughly enjoyable. We're trying to use quite formal language here. Instead of saying the party was fun, I've said the party was thoroughly enjoyable. Then explain why you were pleased. The staff were welcoming and attentive. So we'll say that the staff was the best thing about the party, or the hotel service anyway. And finally, suggest some improvements. Well, it says some improvements, so let's have more than 1. Let's have 2. The decorations could have been improved, and maybe the signs to find the room. We could say that some people couldn't find the room very easily. Now, to change that into slightly more formal language, instead of signs to find the room, maybe we could say improved signage. That's just a little bit less common, less usual for people to use in an exam, so it might impress the examiner a bit more. Now that we've followed the 7 steps, we have a very good plan. We know exactly how to write this letter. I'm not going to write the full letter answer for this now. You'll see that in the second lesson. For now, though, let's look at some students' questions, things that people asked me about General Training Writing Task 1. First question, what are the differences between formal and informal letters? Well, I'm going to go into detail about that in the next 2 video lessons that I make. I'll do a lesson about formal letters and another one about informal letters, and I'll highlight or point out the differences. Will it affect my score if I make mistakes with formal and informal language? Yes, of course. This is one of the most important aspects of writing a letter, getting the tone right, formal or informal. So you'll see me talk about that in the next 2 video lessons. Next question. What about semi-formal letters? Well, I explained earlier in this lesson that sometimes you might not be sure whether to use formal or informal language. For example, writing to a neighbour or a colleague. If it's a neighbour that you know, it could be informal. If it's a neighbour that you don't know, you could write a formal letter. So instead of saying semi-formal, I'm going to say there are some cases where it doesn't really matter. You can choose. Next question. Should we avoid pronouns like I or we in letters? No, you should not avoid them. You will definitely use the word I. You saw in my suggestion in the plan we were doing, I began the letter with I am writing with regard to. So it's very normal to use I, especially in letters. So don't worry about that. Should we start the letter with an address and date? Should we sign the letter at the end? The answer to both of those questions is no. You don't need an address, you don't need a date, and you shouldn't sign it. What verb tense should we use in most letters? Well, it's difficult to say. You might use a few different tenses. It depends what the aim of each paragraph is. If it's telling you to explain something that happened, well, that would be in the past. If it's telling you to apologize or complain about something, it might be in the present, it might be in the past. So we can't really say what verb tense we should use. That depends on the question. So you need to look at that and decide for yourself. Can we include questions in our letters? Yes, you can. You might have to ask someone to do something for you in your letter, and then it's fine to include it as a question. How are letters marked by the examiner? This is the final question I'm going to look at. Well, here's how they're marked. Task achievement, 25%. Coherence and cohesion, 25%. Vocabulary and grammar are both worth 25% as well. So the examiner gives you 4 separate scores, and then an average is done to make the overall score. Task achievement, let me just explain these. Task achievement, it's very important in this part to think about the purpose of your letter, the tone, and answering all the points. This is where you get marks for purpose and tone in your letter, and fulfill the requirements of the task by going through the bullet points and covering everything. Coherence and cohesion, this is about having clear paragraphs, a flow of ideas and some linking, so the letter is easy to read and well structured. Vocabulary, well, we're trying to have appropriate vocabulary. This connects with the tone. Is it formal? Is it informal? The vocabulary will be affected by that. And also, if you want a high score, we're trying to include some less common vocabulary if possible. Remember earlier, instead of follow the signs or not very good signs, I put improved signage, a little bit less common than just the word sign. And finally, the 25% for grammar. My advice for this is, if you have a mix of some long and short sentences, that gives you enough complexity. Don't worry about complex grammar and strange, difficult structures. Just a natural mix of some long and short sentences should cover that. But much more important, I would say, for your grammar score is avoiding mistakes. If your letter has no mistakes in it, you'll almost certainly get a band 9 for grammar. So the fewer mistakes you have, the better your grammar score will be. So that's how letters are marked by the examiner, and that's the end of my advice in this introduction lesson to the General Writing Task 1. In the next lesson, we'll look in detail at formal letters.